I had generally clubbed polite and nice in the same category, which is like you're not necessarily ready to lose social capital for your actions. And I still think that like politeness would do that.
Hi, I'm Divya,
Hi, I'm Karan.
and this is Thinking on Thinking.
So you were saying you had a story.
I mean, it's less of a story and more of a fun fact. But so, do you know that police, polite, policy, political, they all come from the same root word? And they come from polis, like
Okay.
which means city, like metropolis.
Huh. Do you know about the civilizing process?
No, what's that?
This thing. So there's this thing called the civilizing process. And it was this notion that like as societies modernized and we started to behave in a more civilized way towards each other, that there were certain things that started to come into effect. So the part that I'm remembering and that I think stuck with me the most strongly is that one of the things he found is that in certain areas there would be a regression. So like in the American West when it was the gold rush, and all these men went out and there was these really men like heavy towns, like murder was very common, like theft, right? Like all of these things that were marks of a less civilized society increased in scope, right? And then what they found was that in the thing that brought the civilizing process, or in their case, in that was women and religion. And when women and religion came, that then murders would come down, larceny would come down, etc. So it's just interesting to me how those words are all connected, right? Because in a lot of ways, those are the words of, yes, in polite society, we do police ourselves. Of course, we also have police, and those are all the things that lead to society, right?
Yeah.
I feel like this is a great leading because we were thinking about talking about, right, like this notions of like niceness and kindness versus politeness, or really kind of all three of those together. I kind of had, when I'd written it down, I'd been saying that breaking up is the nice thing to do. And then you were correcting me and being like, no, breaking up is not the nice thing to do. Sometimes it's the kind thing to do. It kind of just gave me pause for a second because I was like, yeah, I mean, yes. All right. Like, well, but I think to associate like whether the right thing is the kind thing in your mind or the right thing is the nice thing in your mind, I think the right thing is the kind thing.
In my mind, yes, the connection between kindness, or I don't know if it is right or wrong, because like those in many of these cases would be in the gray zone. But I would say that like kindness is more long term, it's probably gonna be more beneficial for all parties involved. Like, so for example, and this is a very touchy topic, but when people opt for euthanasia, or when people opt for like putting their pets down when they are in end of life stages, they're doing it out of kindness. It definitely does not make them feel like a good person. Like niceness makes someone feel like a good person. Kindness can often feel like you're not the best, you're not the nicest person around, but it's kind because in the long run it's avoiding pain for the other person.
That's really interesting. I wonder if there's a distinction there between like sometimes the kind thing to do, it's the thing that like is taking a cost out of the system, or it's like taking like the payment that has to be paid. What I was thinking about was like, and I'm not sure, I think because you were talking about euthanasia, right? That yeah, there's like this notions of like, if you are in a farm setting or whatever, right? Like that an injured animal that you would, I don't know, I would think I was watching some stuff about the American West or something, and I guess we were just talking about it, right? That you would like kill an animal rather than like leave it to starve, right? If it injured itself in a way that couldn't be saved. I don't know, like that. No, like the term was doing a kindness, right?
Yeah.
And I guess it is because like it is kind of like, I mean, I don't know. It depends on whether you feel like killing something is a burden. I think we talked about in a previous episode that maybe but for most people, right? I think we were talking about in the context of firing actually, but yeah, for most people, like firing, no matter whether it's you're doing the right thing or not, it's still a burden, right? It's still you. Like I think I shared a memory I still carry of like the first time I fired someone,
Yeah.
right? And so I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting, but yeah, sometimes you do need to help people to be able to let go or move on. And I guess that kind of is a kindness. Of course, when it's like, euthanasia, that's a very final way of moving on. But goodness.
But I was just thinking about like it's very, at least in my life, it has been always fairly gray when I have tried to be kind, whether it is to myself or to another person. So, for example, a lot of times you'll hear things like, oh, be kind to yourself. And that generally comes in picture when you are doing something like, oh, I messed up somewhere in life or I made a big mistake. And be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up, right? Like, I don't know how that is related, but as you were speaking about it, I was just thinking like sometimes it's taking an emotional cost like to a part of yourself or on a person that would justifiably be okay with saying I don't want to take this cost, and you still do an act of generosity and take up that cost. That feels a little bit like kindness, like the example that you were giving of people putting animals who are basically fatally injured out of their misery. It's like I don't need to have some animals blood on my hands, but if I
Yeah.
could relieve them of their misery, then maybe that is worth it.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes more dicey. Like, so all of my family before my dad was in the Indian Army, and so one of my uncles is visiting us right now, and like he's told us stories about like fighting in the war and in the 1971 war, which India had with Pakistan,
Hmm.
and yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting, right? Because I do think it's like it does. I've never like killed anything other than a fish, or I guess many fish over the years. But one really big fish that I remember I had to like hit with a bat, which is kind of a crazy thing to imagine. I'll come back to my story about my uncle. I'll tell you the story about the fish because it's crazy. But my dad and I were fishing together on like a small boat, maybe like a 15-foot boat, a Zodiac, I think as they're called, maybe like 10 feet. And we
Hmm.
brought on a fish that was probably maybe 4 feet, right? So
Oh,
it's like a
wow.
big fish. And the thing
Yeah.
is with a fish that big, you actually and you keep a metal baseball bat on the boat because you have to hit it on the head. Because if it's like, right, it can just knock stuff off. It could knock one of you off if you're, kind of catches you with a wave. So yeah, so that was, I mean, I think there was two fish, but one of them, I think maybe the first one that I really hit, like, because it is kind of a thing. Like you hit it, like blood comes out of its mouth, right? Like, and you kind of, yeah. So, it's, I think doing that for more and more kind of just like life forms that I think that like the more humanoid they are, right, the more we connect with them and more they have a face.
Yeah.
I think I read there's some interesting research there, right?
Yeah.
So I think going up towards like actual humans that you might be doing that with is just, yeah, I think kindness it's an interesting word for it. um Haunting words in some ways.
Yeah. I also think that like a lot of times people switch to politeness and niceness to in some weird ways like save face. It's a little bit like when somebody says, oh, how's your day, which is a much more gentler example than killing someone, which is what we have been talking about. But if you think about someone saying, oh, how's your day? And you reply, oh, my day was great. How was your day? And internally, 50% of the days, if someone is asking you that question, you did not feel like your day was great. You
Likely.
had probably a mediocre day, or you had probably a shitty day, right? Like, it's not in the, oh, it was all right, or I'm doing well. Like, those are not the right answers, but those are the polite answers in most cases. Because if you ask someone, how was your day? And someone says, oh, I just found out that my pet is really sick and I might be fired from my job. And you would be like, hey man, I'm just sitting behind you in the restaurant, or I'm just like behind you in the grocery line. I don't want to know this. Like, please don't tell me this.
Would you say that it's not a nice thing to do?
I don't, honestly, I don't know how to have the distinction between niceness and politeness. I do know that, like, in my own life, I've had to unlearn niceness and politeness to learn to be kind.
I don't know. I think when we originally, or at least how I remembered us talking about this previously, it was more of like a dichotomy between nice and kind, and I feel like politeness is a like you can be polite while being kind. Like politeness feels to me like a how you do something and not so much a what you're doing.
Say more?
So, well, I was just thinking that like there's a uh, like to unfortunately now our like killing examples are really stuck in my head. Or but maybe okay, well I'll just do a cook animal one and then come back to what you were saying about a nice day. So I think right, like let's say that you know something did happen to like maybe a horse and you're on a long journey and like it would be the polite thing to do would be like just do it respectfully, right? So I don't know what that would mean in that context, but maybe it would mean like if the horse was close to someone, giving that person a time to like be with their animal before it came time for them to pass. And right, like there's ways you can do things, or to like give your example to of your kind of example of like you know in a casual setting if someone's kind of asking how you are. I think unloading all of your burdens is not a very nice thing to do, right? But again, you can do it in a polite way, where ask for even if you're not willing to ask for permission, you can kind of like give foreshadowing, right? Like you can be like, oh. I really have had need to rant for a second or something, right? Like you can give the moment, like you can basically give the person maybe a moment to escape.
Hmm.
And then I think if I was to say, how could you do it in a kind way that was polite for that kind of scenario? I think a kind thing to do would be to, like, maybe it's not really, you don't need to be talking, right? Right? Like, there's not really, you don't have to feel like you make conversation just because, like, it depends on what the circumstance would be, right? But maybe, like,
Hmm.
maybe I dropped an orange and you're handing me my orange and you hand me the orange. It's like, okay, that's it. You know, like, you know, we don't have to create an interaction out of every interaction. And so maybe if that was like the message you felt like communicating, you can again do it in a polite way and a less polite way. Right? I was just in New York City where people do that in a less polite way all the time. Like there was this street that was closed, 58th Street, and we were supposed to be going to a restaurant on the street, right? Literally, like maybe not even 50 meters away. But apparently, it was Climate Week in New York, and so these like dignitaries were arriving. They were going to something else further down the street, and people were just there was a large crowd of people, and there's barricades on the sidewalk and barricades in the street, and I like kind of thought like I was like, well, if they just knew we were going to this restaurant, like it would be fine. So I like went to go talk to the police officer. But the guy, one of these guys, I kind of said excuse me to, was like, you know, just like kind of like was like, what the hell do you think, man? Like we're just standing here like fucking fools. Like they're not like this. Look at this guy. Like this guy's like apartment is close right there, right? Like they're not letting him through. And the thing is like until everyone had arrived. So eventually I did go talk to a different police officer. He was like, yeah, we got told to close the street. It was 40 minutes ago. We're hoping it's 20 more minutes, but who knows? And it's like it's really interesting to see because like some people in their motorcades, we were speculating who, like they'll have like 6 cars up to like black cars, like 2 police cars, and then an ambulance. And it's like who gets to travel with an ambulance? So we observed this for a few minutes, and then Gaurav and I were like, listen, it's time we just go somewhere else for dinner. Like, and that man was not, he was a little bit impolite, but he was not unkind. You could just cut to the heart of the matter. And then when he realized that I wasn't being a dick about it, he explained more. Like, yeah, he became a little bit more polite. Anyway, it's a long way of saying that I feel like politeness is an orthogonal axis.
Interesting. Like I had not thought of like polite versus rude. I had generally clubbed polite and nice in the same category, which is like you're not necessarily ready to lose social capital for your actions. And I still think that like politeness would do that. Like politeness helps you build social capital. Niceness helps you build social capital. Kindness doesn't always help you build social capital. But yeah, in the way that you are describing it, there would be a rude and a not rude way of doing everything.
Well, I don't think it's at odds, actually, right? I think it's just how there's certain things that we're supposed to talk about, right? And I think those are the nice things to talk about, right?
Hmm.
So Right. But I think you're right, because they're engaging in the game society plays. They're ways of building social capital. Just one of them is a way of building social capital in the what, and the other one is a way of building social capital in the how.
Huh. So I have been reading Ray Dalio's book, Principles.
Yes, I remember.
And he talks a lot about basically being fully honest with the other party. So, like, if something is going wrong, you're not supposed to hide it at all. Oh, something went wrong, you bring it to the table, and then the rest of the team tries to also figure out how can we do this right. So, like, mistakes are not punished, but hiding information is punished.
I think I actually read this part. I got the app on your recommendation. It's entertaining because it gives you nice little, like, whenever you feel like
Yeah.
picking it up, you can take bite-sized amounts. And wait, so how do you feel? You feel like, so in that case, the polite. Oh, go on.
So I would say that, like, at least for me, it feels like on the kindness side of things, where this is for everyone on the team's long-term benefit, and it's for
feel-
the culture's long-term benefit. But it might not seem like the nice or the polite thing to do. Like, often it would raise people's defense mechanisms, I would say, when somebody is coming and telling you, oh, this thing isn't wrong. But then I also think that, I mean, this is slightly orthogonal from, like, just this topic, but it's more sort of larger scale, where I feel like we have a temptation to look at things and interpret them in a certain way. And we forget that, like, our interpretation is based on our context and our ideas and, like, how we have lived through world. So, for example, very recently I was talking to my sister and I just asked her this question, like, do you think I'm like a little bit too much in terms of emotionality? And she was like, because I've always had that thought, not so much anymore, but like that lingering sense of that's how I see myself is still there. And then she just looked at me and she was like, I don't process people that way. Wherever they are emotionally is how they are. I don't conceptualize them as too much or too little. I don't think like that. Like, she said, I'm paraphrasing her, but she basically said something along those lines. And what was interesting to me was she has a completely different model of processing this information than I do. Like, it's me who is thinking, is this too much or too little? And I'm not saying there aren't going to be other people in the world who process it as too much or too little. But, like, there are also going to be a lot of people like her who are going to be, I don't think like that. Who you are is a circumstance and not a problem. Right? So I also feel like when I think about, like, Ray Dalio and how he sort of helps his team build things, it's almost like that, looking at people's actions in a different light. Oh, someone is telling you your fault, not because that's a bad thing or, like, because they want to put you down, but it's because they want to improve together with you. I feel like niceness is something which, like, socially we all agreed upon. Okay, this is the quote unquote nice thing to do. But, like, there could be other ways of arriving at similar outcomes or arriving at harmony in the system. Let me put it more that way.
Well, I think it's not nice to tell someone something they can't change. And then I think it kind of depends on how big you draw the box of, like, what is possible to change.
I mean, okay, you see someone and you tell them you should lose some weight. They can change it. It'll probably be good for them also. Is it nice? Is it kind? Is it polite? I don't think it's any of those things.
Probably not. I mean, again, with the data we have, yes, it seems like it is none of those things. Okay, so like if a baby has food on itself, right? It's considered nice to, like, help, clean it, or, like, help, like, make someone aware that it has food on it, right? Now, if someone who is, like, older, especially, like, someone who's, like, kind of a senior person has, like, some food on themselves, like, it would be less polite or less nice also to, like, draw attention to it, right? Like, you would, like, either maybe discreetly do it or just, like, kind of let it be, ignore it, right? They have, like, a stain, it's fine. So now I think what happens is that we draw a box differently, right? So, like, with a child, it's like, oh, they can change their clothes, like in, there's extra clothes available to it. So the potential actions are very accessible, right? There's, like, you're drawing attention to something that could be rectified. So it's not like an unkind, I'm using the words too loosely there for considering we're having a conversation about them. It's not an unnice thing to do. It's not mean.
Yeah, it doesn't make you feel like a bad person.
Yes, right. Whereas I think, right, again, because of like culturally things, just to do that to an older person is not as nice because they don't have that. Like there's the way we would, at least just at first glance, think about the set of actions available to them. It's like, well, are they going to have extra clothes in their handbag? Probably not. Like, is there someone to help them change immediately? Probably not. So I think that's what I was saying, where I think whether it's nice or not depends on how we have perceived that the potential set of possible actions available in the situation, and therefore whether we're prescribing something that is like possible or not possible.
I'm not.
I'm like trying to chase some crisp meaning here. Like I'm going to be able to put some clear definition by the time we're done today. Go on,
So,
I'm sorry.
like, of course, there are maybe like other variables as well. Maybe there are other words that we could be using. I am not particularly sure, but this is a side story. But in college, like amongst a group of friends, we had these like two friends, and recently, not these two guys, but like another friend from the group was talking about how one of the guys, you always knew where you stood with him. He wasn't a particularly nice person, but like, he would be rude, he would be sometimes mean, but you always knew that where you stood with him. If he liked you, you will know it. If he didn't like you, you will know it. And there was this other person who always felt so inauthentic in some ways. Like he was very, very nice. Like he was extremely nice. But you could just never tell what he is actually thinking or feeling. And I'm not saying that you have to be always wearing your heart on the sleeve or never wear it outside. But at the same time, I feel like there is something, like, especially as I've grown older, there is something that I've been appreciating more about people showing authenticity and kindness rather than just being nice to not hurt my feelings or whatever.
That's interesting because I feel like that starts to go into what I think we talked about really early on, right? But like when someone feels like an us versus the them, and then like also where signaling, it was I think our first episode, where signaling can start to make you feel like if it feels like they're part of too many groups, or like that they're like, right, then it starts to feel like kind of shifty. I don't know, when you were talking about your second friend there, I kind of was wondering if that was some of the feeling.
Yeah.
Right. But then I don't know if that's, I feel like that maybe is a different axis, right? Like that's.
I mean, a lot of times we take niceness as a proxy for how people should feel about me.
Oh, that's interesting. What do you say more?
For example, this is also true for both of us. We know what is the right thing to say in a situation, what is going to lead to, like, a favorable reaction from the other side, or even how to mold the words that we are trying to say in a way that would lead a favorable reaction. I'm not saying, oh, we are the best in the world at it, but we are like on the right side of the mean in this situation.
Yeah.
Right? Like both of us have, due to whatever confluence of our life effects have been, like when you are part of multiple minorities, you learn to navigate life through a lot of niceness.
Yeah.
And so I would say niceness is also adapted that way. But I also think that it prevents you from like being able to authentically like see yourself or see the other person. You want to have a constructed image and you want to maintain that constructed image in front of other people, and that's why you're being nice. Like you as a generic you here, not always, not fully, but there is always that underlying current of it.
I think sometimes the nice thing to do is the less scary thing to do. Right. I think I mentioned this in one of a document that I was working on a few weeks ago, and you wrote a comment where you were like, "What is like?" I can't remember what I said. Maybe pack, follow the pack or something, right? And I think it's the same kind of thing, right? Where when you know that culturally this is what people do, which is what the nice thing to do is, then it doesn't take as much. You don't need as much like chutzpah, like
Yeah,
to be able to get yourself to do it.
very true.
Okay, no. Do you know the book Less?
No.
Oh, so I just finished reading it. Well, okay. The example I was going to give you, and maybe I shouldn't ruin for our podcast listeners as well, is well, I guess I can tell it in a way that's a pretty small scene. But the title character, Arthur Less, has been stuck somewhere, and it is an old Japanese establishment, and the door is 400 years old and will not open. However, the walls are made out of paper, and they're painted paper, and the people are telling him just punch your way through the wall, and you will be able to break a hole. And this paper is very easy to replace. Like, you don't feel bad about it. And
Hmm.
it's just really interesting because he's really goes into emotional turmoil because he's just like, I can't destroy this thing. Like it's really, really beautiful, and he's gonna have to smash it with his fists. And I was just thinking about how, like, you kind of understand because of everything that's happened why he's in that point and why it's so hard for him to destroy it. But I think it's kind of related to what we're saying, right? Like to do sometimes the kind thing to do in that situation is that, right? He has all these people on the other side who are worried. They're trying to, like, is he going to be able to get out? Like, he's supposed to be having this intimate dinner and they
Yeah.
can't even serve the next course. And but right, to do the not nice thing, to do the yeah, it just, like, it takes something from you. You have to have the little bit more strength of will in that moment to, like, muster to do.
Hmm.
Do you like my example?
No, that is actually a very good example. That's also like a very good articulation of, like, it requires more chutzpah and it requires more emotional labor. Like, one of those two things is going to be required. You basically almost need to give away a part of what you have thought of yourself as, right? Like, I'm not the kind of person who says these kind of things to people because I don't want to be seen as XYZ.
Yeah, it's actually, niceness is sometimes an excuse, right? You're like saying, oh, well, I don't want to do it because it's not nice, but it's actually like it's because I don't have the energy.
Hmm. Or you don't want to take out the cost that it would require. Because,
Which
like,
is,
for example,
you
like,
don't want to spend the energy, maybe. Yeah,
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 like,
you're right.
for example, the initial example that we started from, which is like breaking up, is a kind thing to do, but not a nice thing to do. Not
Yeah.
only is it not nice to the other person, you will also suffer a lot of consequences. You might lose a part of your social network. You might lose, like, you will have to tell everyone about it. Everyone is gonna have some thoughts. They will all alter their image of you, and sometimes in favorable ways and sometimes in unfavorable ways, but almost always in uncontrollable ways.
I was in a relationship for a long time, and then when we broke up, my ex ended up, like, leaving me for someone else, and then it took me a
Hmm.
long time to realize that most of our mutual friends just don't know that part of the story. And then I'm like, guys, how did you not put it together that he was, like, dating someone within a few months? But, like, obviously because I moved to India right away, and so a lot of people were in the US, and it's just like, yeah, like obviously that was not the part of the story that, and people don't want to be, like, rude about it. Oh, and I think that, like you were saying, they don't want to, like, take on that emotional burden um of kind of investigating further, so they kind of, people just made their own assumptions.
Yeah. Have you had, like, have you ever been in a professional context on crossroads of niceness and kindness where you had to choose one or the other?
Yeah, for me, in a professional context, actually, it's not as difficult. I'm not sure why, but I think that's why I had that distinction about politeness so readily available to hand, because I think I find that, like, there's a lot of times that you can I guess I think like two examples kind of come to mind. Don't think we've like discussed in detail on the podcast before, but I did choose to shut down VidyaNext at a time that we still had about, I think 6.5 months of runway. And I kind of took that choice because I looked at just at the culture of the company that we had built. I mean, obviously there's also issues around the straight sort of like customer acquisition and the amount of actual revenue we were getting per customer. But I think
Hmm.
a lot of times those can be surmountable. But I think what we had built was unfortunately something which was, it was a weird ethos. The company was about 14, 15 years old, and every year it had been able to get money from the same investors to kind of stay in business, but it wasn't able to generate revenue. And what it had done every year was pivoted. Not every year, maybe some cases every 2 to 3 years. And at that moment, when I announced the company shutting down, I called in all hands, and I had previously formed a team that was going to be running the application that we had built, that we were going to be spinning out into being its own company. And so at the point where I was announcing that the company was going to shut down, I also was announcing that this team was spinning out, and that they would be their own company, but they had already been functioning as a team for some time. And I think in a lot of ways it was a kindness, I think, because there were people who were stuck there and kind of had been there, right? And that some of them had been there since the beginning. And, I think it's hard for some people to, I don't know, you've put a lot of to acknowledge the sunk cost fallacy, basically, right? And I think in doing that, I feel like a lot of people are at better outcomes than they would be if we were, still kind of like fighting along, because I don't think the data would support that we, I don't know, it's hard to predict what could have happened. The other example I was thinking about, though, is kind of an interesting one. I had hired someone to be my chief operating officer, and also to be my head of pedagogy, and I ended up letting him go in a moment when I realized that I had lost trust in the way that he was operating. And I think that was an interesting thing, because I think actually it was the nice thing to do, and it wasn't the kind thing to do, right? I think it was the nice thing to do because it was what was like culturally kind of expected, right? Like in a corporate environment, right? When people see that you have lost trust, the rest of the leadership team is kind of right. But I think that in some ways the kind thing to do would have been to have pushed on it a lot harder, right? Which would have been like to really push on like, where were our expectations? What are the outcomes that we have achieved? Why are we in this place, right? And I don't know. I mean, I think in that case, it's interesting because one of those events actually, like those events are about 6 months apart. So I ended up letting my COO go, and then about 6 months later, it was when I initiated the process that would shut down the company. And about 6 months after that, we ended up shutting down. And I think I was a lot more exhausted at the time that I let my COO go, right? Like I had a lot less ability to push on things outside of where I could kind of push on, right? There was a certain set of things I was being able to like kind of put energy into, and I had for those, and there were some other things that I needed to kind of push on, but outside of those, I just like, there wasn't that much space. Whereas later, about 6 months later, I had a lot more space. I think part of it was that just I was able to kind of like consolidate and just reduce how much like chaos was going on once I had a little bit more of control over the situation, and then was able to have more space to be like, oh, now I can make decisions in a less reactive way. And at least for me, I feel like a lot of the times I'm making decisions that are, the status quo or not, or what we might be, saying nice in this conversation, are coming from a more reactive place. They're coming from the time periods where I haven't had the mental space to be able to sit down and unpack it and say, what is driving me to feel this way? What is driving me to want to do this?
Yeah. No, I hear you. It's very interesting because like in many cases one would think that firing someone cannot be like, it's all the same. So there was this one team that I had sporadically worked with over a long duration in bits and pieces, and I had always taken their behavior as being very kind. And it took me a long time to sort of realize that they were just being nice because they didn't want to face the difficult conversations. Like when they decided to sort of say that, oh, we won't work together anymore, instead of saying that we won't work together anymore, they were like, oh, right now we don't want to work together, but in a couple of months we're definitely gonna come back. And then we would talk, and we were really friendly friends with each other, like however one wants to call it. we would talk about it, and the reaction would be like, oh my god, I'm so sorry, things have been so busy, but I definitely want to do something together. And then they just wouldn't. They would say that, oh, I'm gonna come to this meeting, but then they would flake or stuff like that. And
Yeah.
it slowly sort of was heartbreaking in some ways, because it was
Yeah.
like, oh, we have had a years long relationship. You could just do me the kindness of saying bye.
Yeah.
We can't work together anymore. um and I think that, like, there is another team that I was consulting with till last year end. And after I told them that I don't think that I want to, like, I don't think that I want to do this anymore, guys, like, I was feeling particularly burnt out, and they were like, oh, okay, so why don't you take some time, and, like, as we are growing the team, why don't you, like, maybe consult with us on the product, on the design. And it was really so lovely that even after these guys decided to pivot, we still are in touch. Like, I
Mm.
consulted with them for, like, 3-4 months, and then we are still in touch. We still talk to each other. And there's just this, like, because they never, after they said, oh, we don't have money anymore to pay you for consulting services, I don't think we can continue on from the next month. It just
Yeah.
was like so clean, and almost like, because they owned up to it, it just felt so kind.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if a lot of times the kind thing to do is the honest thing.
Yeah, and I wonder if, because it's the honest thing, sometimes it's also about acknowledging our own faults, and maybe
Yeah.
we are being nice just so that we can also protect our own image in our
Yeah.
head.
I do like this. I don't know if you now you had like an hour or whatever to think about it, but if you also kind of like this notion of that like the what, right? So like what you do is can be like nice or kind, but how you do it is polite or I don't know. I feel like rude is too strong. It's
I mean, impolite is a word, but I feel like impolite does not communicate the emotion very properly.
it's like are you going to take that put the extra energy in to meet the person emotionally where they are, you know?
So maybe a better word could be considerate or inconsiderate. So, like, you could be kind and considerate, and you could be sometimes nice and inconsiderate.
Hmm.
I don't have to punch someone down just because I'm saying something negative to them.
Interesting. In that book, actually, there's another example of that. The title character again is a writer, and he's dated a very famous poet, and so he is like in these circles of, and so he's talking to this other writer, and the gentleman's like, you know why you never win any rewards? He's like, it's because you're a bad gay. And then the title character is like very taken aback by this, and right, and it's interesting because it's like he's kind of being nice, right? Because like he and Arthur Less, even like because you are privy to his mental dialogue, he's like he feels compelled to say thank you for it for being told that he's a bad gay because of the way it's like told to him. But it's not very considerate, right? Like it's kind of like it's a nice, right? Because he's like, oh, this is why you don't win award shows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that doesn't seem like kindness, even though it could, like, sort of almost mask as that.
Yeah. It's a good book. You should check it out.
Okay, I'll check
Yeah.
it out. But I feel like a lot of these notions of, like, interplay between kindness, honesty, authenticity, niceness, politeness, considerateness are, I think that a lot of conversations that we have been having have been about how we navigate world and the conceptual models that are inside us. And this feels like exploring a new dimension that we haven't explored before.
I think it's really interesting, like, and related to the one you mentioned a few weeks ago, and we should come back to. But like how our ability to have words to describe things shapes our way to think about them. So maybe in our next episode we can talk about that.
Yes. Awesome. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Good talk. Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Thinking on Thinking. Our theme music is by Steve Combs, and you can find a link to it in the show notes.